So they kind of, my idea was to have this theme that resolves at the end, and the middle, I played the middle piece the first Salon that I came to. But yeah, does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, what about the process you go through trying to figure out what to do? How does you get the music out of your head? You just kind of shake your head sideways and fall on
A little from one level.
I remember, I think, yeah, it was you that told me, you know, when you compose, you know, the things that come out are musical perversions of absolute perfection. That's
Yeah.
in your head. And, you know, it takes, you know, it's taken me probably about, I don't know, 3 years to kind of finally understand, you know, what it is to decipher something that is true in a sense and something that should belong and something that doesn't quite feel right. And you know, you feel that you're being or at least I feel that if I am not absolutely positive that that is what I want to play, I feel that I am lying to the audience, that I'm not conveying what I should be.
Yeah, a lot of composers do compose from their head.
Yeah.
And particularly if they're a tuba player and then they're writing for an entire orchestra, I wonder how do they know what the violin's going through.
Yeah.
So, and in most cases, you can ask John, they don't know what the violin is going through. They will actually read in a book that the violin's lowest note is this and the violin's highest note is this, and they will write something that only 4 performers in the world have ever been able to play. And then they wonder why every time their piece is played by some small town somewhere in America, it sounds lousy. So one of the most important things is, no matter how perfect this stuff is in your head, what you can do in the real world is different than what I can do in the ideal world, but what you put on paper has to be honest. It has to be, your integrity's on the line. It has to be what you feel.
Yeah.
What you feel.
I was listening to this interview of Bjork. She did Arvo Pärt. He's an Estonian composer. And she asked him like pretty much the same question that you asked me. And he said something along the lines that, you know, music, sound has the ability to kill you. But if it can do that, it obviously has the ability to do the exact opposite of that.
Right.
And the space between those points is so vast, and you have the freedom to choose what you want to do. You know, you have that freedom. But, you know, he emphasized the point that everything that is created is not necessary.
Right.
And, you know, that you really have to, as a composer and artist, you know, transcends all art, you really have to be selective in that.
Right.
And it's hard. Yeah, editing is a big part of composing, and that's the hardest part.
So in the future, some young hotshot comes out of some college somewhere and he grabs your piece. What would you like him to do when he approaches it, trying to learn to play it? As a composer, what would you expect from them?
To read the notes.
Yeah, to read the notes, right?
No, I mean, I think, you know, what we were talking about last night, you know, and I think, you know, Glenn Gould said it too. I mean, he played Bach, which is, you know, perceived as one of the most regimented,
right,
you know, compositional styles. But, you know, I would want them to interpret it, you know. If
right.
they need to take out a note or two to make it their own, I would be totally okay with that,
right.
You know, because, I mean, it takes model after the Romantic period, which, I mean, is obviously, you know, it's human passion, all that intermixed, and everybody's so personal that, you know, I would want them to make it kind of their own, but hopefully retain it.
So if we study the notes first, as accurate as we can, we get into your head and see where you're coming from and try to get the feeling of the way you say it. Then if I'm going to perform the piece, what you want me to do is put some of my own shit in there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Because when you play pieces of masters, you know, they're revealing something, you know, I mean, it's a thought process that they went through, you know, it's their train of thought.
Right.
And, you know, hopefully if somebody was to play that of mine, which I'm not even sure what it is, would be revealed.
Yeah, so the job of basically of the poet performer is to not just read the poem the way it was intended, but to know what was intended, and then to bring your own self to it as well, and to also listen to the way other people read or did dramatic interpretations of that poem, and see what you can learn from them or glean from them, and then still use that as inspiration to find more of your own stuff. So when you read that poem, it's your dramatic reading.
Following up on,
Yeah, please. Oh.
following up on what Natch was saying, for the future music historian performer who is looking at your piece and wanting to play it, how important do you think it would be for that person to have researched you? And maybe even, if they're listening to a recording, researching what went into you making that recording that this person is hearing, for them then to get into your head, not only as you've written it, but then later as you played it, so that they can interpret it through themselves and out.
I think that's a very good question. I mean, I would hope that, you know,
should come at the note in the bottom of the piece. Please do these things.
Click
Please,
on this.
That's very
read
good
this
question.
carefully.
I would hope that, in the piece that I've written, the notes that I've written down, it would, be somewhat readily available to the performer, but obviously that's not the case. But I think that's a very good question. I don't know, I've never really thought about that before.
Dude, you've never been in my head.
Well, I know personally from my own experience that I read all of Beethoven's memoirs, and I read a lot of stuff about the history of Beethoven. But then I got the letters that he was writing to some of his friends, and I got some of the replies. And being able to see both sides of the phone conversation, I had a completely different point of view of him as a man. And then when I went to play his piece, it lended itself to a completely different interpretation.
And that's what I was getting.
So the deeper you get into the person, of course, the composer, the more you know about them personally. One of the problems with music writing is it's a form of, I hate to say, almost a form of vampirism. When you write notes, you're just creating shadows or phantoms, which you're placing on a piece of paper that's flat. Now that feeling that you have is a three-dimensional, in-depth feeling that cannot be put into that paper. So imagine if I turned out all the lights and put on a spotlight right now and shined it across all of you people up against the wall there, and one of you started wiggling your head. We could all look at the shadows and know who's wiggling their head. But you wouldn't want me to think that the shadow is you, and that everything the shadow does is who you are in depth, right? So the shadow really is just a model or representation of some aspect of you. Or you go on YouTube and you do your little YouTube things and you talk to other people on YouTube and you yell and shout at each other on YouTube and get your little arguments going and stuff, and it's all kind of interesting, but in a way, what you're seeing on YouTube, even though you think you're talking to somebody, there's a person there you can't possibly really know, because you're only getting an electronic impression of them. And it's how they are when they're in front of a camera, not yelling at you. And they feel safe in their house, in Russia, when they're yelling at you here in San Francisco. But if you were in a room together and you had knives in your hand and you really got a chance to criticize each other, you know what I'm saying? It'd be different. So even in something like that, like the media like we're using here, the electronics media, it's still just a shadow or portents of who the person really is. So in some way you can never really know that. So a lot of interpretation is necessary. Now the more you get to know the person whose music or art you're trying to interpret, the better, because you're not relying on the shadow. You try to turn the shadow into the most three-dimensional image of that person that you can in your own life. And then you have a better idea how they go about it. Leonard Bernstein said the most important thing that ever happened to him in his life was one day when he was tromping around Europe. He loved Beethoven. He was tromping around Europe, and someone gave him notes of Beethoven. These were pre-notes that he wrote on some of the symphonies. And he said what a joy it was to look at all the mistakes that Beethoven made, and all the parts that he started to write out that he didn't like, that he scratched out and threw away. He said it was more interesting to learn more about what Beethoven liked from what he threw away than it was from what he saw on the page. You see what I'm getting at? Yeah.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, when my teacher Ben died, he took all of his old notes and threw them in the garbage. And he sat down and he made beautiful vellum copies of all of his music. And he wanted to send those in to be copyrighted. And then when his back was turned, I ran out into the backyard and took all the stuff out of the garbage and put it in a knapsack and brought it home here, and it's on the shelf behind Saya here. And he said to me once, he said, why do you want my garbage and not the beautiful scores that I finished? And I said, how the hell will I ever know how you got to that if I don't keep this? And as a historian, it's really bugged the hell out of me watching you throw it in the trash. I mean, I don't even know how you could do that. you know, for all of us people who come after you that want to know how you got that. So I kept all those pieces, and I have all those pieces. And when I look at some of his songs, if I really want to know the song in depth, I go digging through the trash and see how these little pieces of paper, these little notes too short to use.
You're like a forensic archaeologist.
Yes, it's like forensic archaeology. But it really gives me an insight into his thinking to see what he rejected.
Now, you know, when you were playing, it's like you played the middle part last time we heard it, and then you did the beginning
and the end
this time. And frankly, my impression was I like the middle part just better because I don't know if you're moody today or the intensity or I don't know if the way you play it is affecting how you feel right now or not. But I like the middle part better than the ending and the beginning.
Yeah.
That's just my impression.
Well, the middle part, the beginning, like this piece that I just, the beginning, I mean, I wrote that in 2 weeks, and the end I wrote in about a day or two. And that middle part, I mean, that was about 6 months of writing.
Yeah, there you go. Big difference there.
So that has, but I mean, that's what the piano drama is supposed to be. It's supposed to be, the middle is supposed to,
the best part.
retain. Yeah.
Well, it's a development, yeah.
And then the prelude is supposed, or the intro is supposed to, present, beginning to expose into it.
But then think back to what Natch said a little bit earlier, and that is, we heard tonight the beginning, prelude, and the epilogue. The middle was done the other time. But the only way that it can be completely appreciated is a gestalting of the three.
Right.
Because each element adds something to each,
right.
every other element, and then refers
Right.
back to the previous element, and you're putting those together, and it's coming out to us, not only as the whole that you wrote, but the whole that you wrote that you're presenting in the mood you're in tonight.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's true. I mean, definitely my daily moods dictate how I play and how I convey it. And actually, during the middle of my playing, I was thinking, man, I'm playing this way too loud.
Yeah, and Natch said it's safe. I remember I heard you say that, and I guess you were able to start off.
So,
Bang the hell of it!
so I have a question. You said that you, and we can definitely hear this, that you conceived it in the late Romantic style. And, the Romantics kind of developed the music in opposition or in similar to the theme that, I forgot your name, that you had in protest, right? So, but it's the end of that phase, and that protest is, running out of steam. It's, getting diluted in some way. And I'm wondering, do you feel that speaks at all to your concern in this time, that you are drawn to that kind of tradition?
I mean, I think I'm drawn to that kind of tradition in a sense because that genre, I guess you would call it, speaks most truly to me. I mean, not to keep quoting people, but I've been reading Stravinsky's Poetics and Music. It's a series of 6 lectures he did at Harvard or Yale or something. But he was saying, musical styles go in and out of popularity, and that's needed because, for instance, the Romantic period went on for a relatively long period of time. And it got overdone, and people had heard it too much, and it got kind of very diluted. And then, you take a step back from it, and then here I am, 100 years later, and I'm able to look at the Romantic period, specifically the late one, like I was saying, and it's almost, I have a fresh view of it because it's not everywhere. I mean, to find people in my age group that love classical music is it's hard to find, but it's kind of refreshing at the same time because I'm able to, there's not really a lot of constraints on me because it's I have all this freedom. Does that answer your question? Or,
Well, it answers a different question, and it's an interesting answer. Yes.
is there a better way I could answer it?
Well, you know, I am. Since the theme is the protest, right, and responding to maybe, you know, a time where certain things have run its course, you know, as we were talking about, you know, the political system, the economic system, it seems to have run its course and be in its death throes. And then, you know, you are choosing to write in the late romantic style. So if you know, if this is just something that happens subconsciously or something that you consciously make that decision.
I mean, I don't have a choice. It's just what comes out.
Yeah.
You know, it's.
I did make a conscious decision, though, to be romantic. I did. And part of it, too, is we've always thought of romantic composers as people who suffered well. And I used to tell friends of mine that you don't have to suffer to be romantic. Mm-hmm. So I want to be that person. Yeah. I want to be the person that's not suffering the angst of my music and write romantic stuff. Then I decided one time that romantic wasn't enough. I wanted a specific kind of romantic, and I decided that all my music had to be pretty. Now that was a heavy constraint for me. It really was hard at first to say, what the hell's pretty? You know, and then to write stuff that other people would say, gee, that's pretty. And it took a while. So I even confined myself in a tighter box. But it's who I am. I chose that, and sometimes I get over it, but most times that's what comes out of me. You find yourself doing that, interpreting non-romantic pieces in a romantic way?
Yeah.
Because I do that with Bach, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I play Bach very romantically. And it is not recommended, which is one reason why I don't get along with universities and people in their ivory towers. I tend to be protest. I protest against their rigid ideas about what that stuff is. And we'll just do it to spite them.
I just say a lot on that. And also, I think it's, I mean, as a modern composer, you know, it's really hard because, you know, there's all this avant-garde stuff going on.
Right.
There's all this really kind of very theoretical music, and I think it's really hard just to, you know, not say screw that, but stand and just kind of do your own thing. Something that reigns true to you. You know, it's hard because there's a lot of push against.
Well, there's that integrity again.
Yeah.
Play what you know. Put on paper what you feel. Let it represent you 100%. So when people learn it, they learn about you, not about music theory.
Two thoughts came to my mind, and they're actually two ends of one stick, so they're really one thing. And they're not really opposites, but I was hearing like that romantic wash of sound, you know, like a big orchestra, you know, because I feel the same way because I play the violin. And then also, I was wondering what would it sound like with no pedals at all, so the entire power of the whole piece can go into one note and connect to the next note. Mm-hmm. Right, which is the power of all of Beethoven's works and how he gets, you know, I sang, I'm not really a singer, but I decided to sing bass for they have a sing-along Christmas thing, like they do the Hallelujah, so they also had to do Beethoven's Ninth over New Year's. Safe, nobody can hear it that I know. But it was so beautiful to watch Beethoven compose a quartet. And the noisy bassoon that's always out of tune compared to the violins, you know, I was like, how did he do this? And then suddenly he builds it into this enormous thing. And I'm like, God, I'm so glad I'm here singing. And finally, the violin, they only give you one part, so you don't know why you're there, how anything, and you have to watch the baton, so you can't listen to anything because you're out of time if you don't watch the baton. So now I could finally sing the bass line, which I've always wanted to know, watch all the other four parts, and sit in the back and watch everybody play finally for the first time. Because I was only the first violin section, I couldn't see anything. I was like, it was so funny, so I just loved being back there and listening to everybody.
Right.
So I was just hearing, but he would take one note. The entire power of that entire Ninth Symphony goes into one note and connects to the next and the next and the next and then builds to this big thing. Because he gets that giant sound that I love, you know. So I'm just wondering how those two things are really the same in your playing. Because, you know, you're like me, I love all the reverb and all the arpeggios, and let's let the whole room do the hallelujah thing, you know. Because that's like the essence of romantic music, is relief from suffering and pain.
It is, yeah.
It's not a dying out.
Yeah.
of anything. It's a relief. Can we have some joy?
Yeah.
You know, how many wars in the last 200? You know, from like 1800 to 2000. There's so many wars. You know, people just looking for relief, for joy, or something.
Right, the Greeks are obsessed with minor music because they say it makes them happy. And I know that
Goes back
certain
and forth.
sad music cheers me up.
Yeah.
You know, Salvador Dali once said, was at this table reading a newspaper and he was laughing. And this guy walked by and looked over and it was a tragedy. It was a train crash in which people had died. And he said to him, "What are you laughing about?" And he said, "Because I'm sitting here reading this."
Well, the other thing is the old.
So it's a way of affirming life sometimes when you read a tragedy.
The old minor music of the Greeks and all those things, they have many, many minor thirds that Western music doesn't actually put into them. There's no written notation for
Right.
those feelings. So the purification or the healing of the heart of a minor third, which a violin can do because we're not limited to the piano. We can bend a note. We can have 100 minor thirds in one song. And each one can be different. One can make you cry. One can make you feel stuck. One can make, and they're all minor third. And you would never be able to notate it, but you can pass it on. And Pythagorean had a different set of overtones.
right.
The Greeks had, you know. So if you just actually try and mathematically do it, Western music doesn't include any of that music in any of our notation. So the healing of minor music, you know, if you take the modes, Arabic modes, out of all their maqams, there's at least 62 notes out of an octave that you have to know how to play to play all the maqams properly. And you just, you know, you talk to any conservatory guy from Turkey and he'll say, "Oh yeah, there's all these," they just learn it. Just like a scale, but you only do it relative to each scale. So, you know, in the violin we have to bend all the notes around to get all that sound. And in the orchestra though, but what we do different, which is unique in the West, is we have simultaneous octaves. There's no other world music that plays, you know, whole piano. We did parallel octaves from one end to the other. We create, you know, the Hallelujah Chorus. We create the Rules of Angels. We create all kinds of sounds. That's the power of our spirit in our music that other world music doesn't do. They have one, you know, it's like, you know, like my friends in Texas like say, "Swat that bug and put it out of its misery." You know, they're like that. Instead of, we don't even hear it that way. And yet, if they don't sing that way, you can't hear them in the back row because there's no, you know. So anyway, so it's just different purpose of music. But there's a power in the piano and that orchestral, you know, bigness. It's special. It's
Well,
very.
in all fairness to Beethoven and all of that, we wouldn't have this world kind of music or this Western music if it weren't for Beethoven, right? You know, and,
Actually, he was responsible for the piano.
and tuning it.
Yeah.
to whatever-
Well, Bach and Weber were the two guys that really got into equal tempering.
Yeah.
But Beethoven, as he was going deaf, he didn't tell anyone he was going deaf. And he kept yelling at the piano manufacturers to make it louder and bigger. And in his time, a keyboard was typically 4 to 4.5 octaves.
Wow.
By the time he died, it was 7.5 octaves. That was because of his kvetching. The other thing is that all the earlier pianofortes, which were experimental at that particular time, around the time of Mozart, it started coming around, and actually Mozart got to play a piano. The problem was that it was a sort of weak or thin, anemic sounding device that used a wooden harp. And when you started adding more strings and adding more octaves, the wooden harp couldn't handle the stress anymore, and the harps broke. And again, it was a technological advancement where somebody had come up with the idea of drawing the harp in sand and casting it with iron. And the iron harp gave rise to the modern piano. So it was metallurgy and someone coming up with this idea of using the way Africans used to make rings and stuff in wax and destroy the wax and making the ring. So they took that process and did it in sand, made a metal harp, and then was able to put 3 strings for each note across 7.5 octaves. So you have something like 150 tons. I mean, the pressure. The harp could hold an entire tribe of elephants. And that was the thing, because there was no wood that was capable of doing that till that time. So you have that metallurgy plus Beethoven's kvetching, plus the need to have a keyboard that could play as loud as the whole orchestra.
Well, plus Beethoven put the marching band for war In with the violins, you have to have so many violins
That's
to equal one trumpet, you know.
Right.
And then the violin finally had to be stretched and put wire strings on it. So once they had wire strings, wire piano, put the military band in the middle of the violins, where you have to have 40 violins or 3 sections and enormous amount of strings to equal one trombone. You created the modern orchestra.
Right,
It's the birth of modern music.
Yeah, a small brass choir can pretty much outblow an orchestra.
One trombone can blast the entire, every string out of